What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Got some more Aetherdrift previews, finally. I know, it took a while to get this one out. Sorry, found my old glasses, but I lost my car keys and my dryer broke. It's been a real marquee day around here, but after all that, I am ready for nothing more than to sit back and look at some Magic cards with you. So let's go ahead and get to it. We have 22 new cards to look at, and even some of the commons look good today. So let's go ahead and do it. Now, of course, not all of the commons look good today, but even the bad ones have angles like Beast Rider Vanguard and End Rider Catalyzer. Couple of riders here. An In-Rider Catalyzer, like almost rhymes. You can make bars with that, but Beast Rider over here is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 human knight. You can pay 4 into green. A hefty sum, but you look at the top 3 cards of your library and reveal a permanent from among them, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So a little limited mana sink to make sure you get some card selection in the late game. I'm kind of into it, but obviously it's nothing too special. Now, In-Rider Catalyzer, I think, is slightly more interesting, but probably still not destined for too much play, right? This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 3/1 human warrior with Start Your Engines. And once you hit max speed, you can tap him for 2 red mana. So in Limited, he's a 2 mana, 3 power guy, which is kind of nice some of the time, but the max speed mode is, I guess, what's the most interesting on this, but that's not going to happen until turn 3 at the absolute earliest, and more likely in Limited especially, like turn 5 or something, so maybe even more. So I'm just not like super convinced this guy is the next best ramp piece in Standard. If you'll excuse me, I'm just not sure he's quite there. But we also got to see a couple of common mounts today, like Gilded Goda and Brightfield Glider. One of these looks better to me than the other. So we'll start with Gilded Goda here. I wish this card was Gouda, but it's really just cheese. It's 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 horse mount with saddle 1. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, create a treasure token. That's actually not horrible. We saw like a green-red vehicle a little bit earlier in previous season that I think we called the Boost Scoot and Buggy or something. We did a whole joke about that. It was fun. And this is very similar to that, but easier to cast. The difference is, it's always a creature, it's not a vehicle. And it has 1 less power. So, like, subtle differences, but I do like that there's multiple creatures at lower rarities in this set that create a treasure token when they attack. That's going to be really nice for Limited, but these also have, like, some chance, a ghost of a chance at Standard playability, but this one I think falls just short. Now, Brightfield Glider over here looks okay at first glance, but on closer inspection, there's a couple of things that made me side-eye it. This is a single white mana for a 1/1 Possum Mount. That's good creature types. It's got Vigilance, and whenever it attacks while saddled, it gets +1/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. All right. It saddles for 3, though, which is like a little expensive. Like, when you really think about it, you're always kind of trading down on power to attack with this. Now, before you say it in the comment section, I will give you that at least in the Limited environment, there are going to be tons of these like little 1/1 pilot tokens guys, and like they can crew this very smoothly. That's the value you're looking for right there. But a lot of the time, if like a real creature has to crew this, you spent real mana on that real creature that you'd probably rather be attacking and blocking with than like getting in for 2. Ooh, there's times where because this guy flies, they're like, once you've crewed him, he flies at least. And like, you're getting in damage in the air you wouldn't have otherwise have gotten. So all that's good, but these are all kind of limited arguments. I'm not sure that this dude sees any play outside of that format, although, even though I've kind of pushed back on this initial point a couple of times already, I will say, end of the day, 1 mana, 2/3 flyer. Bottom line, So that could be pretty good. And the Vigilance is nice too, You can swing with it in the air and then still have like a kind of beefy-ish flyer up to block any Deep Cavern Bats or like bat tokens from Sanguine Evangelist. I don't know what you're playing against. This blocks a Fairy Mastermind nicely. Starscape Cleric, I could keep going, but I think you get what I'm trying to say here. The fact that it stays up for defense is kind of nice. Let's keep going. We got to look at Clamorous Ironclad and Velen Heart Bike up next. Now, Ironclad is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 6/3 vehicle with Menace, and it crews for 3. And you can cycle it for a single red mana, which is the reason I've put it above all the other cards we've looked at so far. Just a single red mana to cycle it is kind of nice. It might actually go in like Pioneer, Zenith, Flare decks. They're always looking for stuff that cycles for a single mana rather than 2 mana. So like, I don't know, unless they're already at critical mass, they might end up with this. And interestingly, like, if it does end up in a cycling deck, and you actually have to play it out of your hand, like that's the better option, which it will be some of the time, right? Then like some of the stuff in the deck can crew it, like a big enough Flourishing Fox can crew it, or a big enough like Marauding What's-His-Face, the 1-drop from the set that gets larger when you discard cards and he cycles too, right? So if there is like a cycling deck, then like maybe this thing makes it just because of the sheer low cost of cycling it. But again, if you ever actually have to play it, 6 power Menace guy, you could do a lot worse. I know it doesn't sound like the most ironclad premise, but take it some of the time, trust me. We'll move on here to Velo Heart Bike. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 4/2 vehicle. When it ETBs, you gain 2 life. You can tap it for a mana of any color, and it crews for just 2. So, like, the only bad thing about this is the 2 toughness, right? So, you're not going to have the best time sending it in all the time, but it doesn't die to go for the throat, and it doesn't die to cut down, so that takes care of a fair amount of black removal, like, right there. So I don't hate this. You got some sweeper protection on your 3 mana rock that makes mana of any color, and just like an incidental ETB gains some life. I mean, I'm not going to compare it to Ancient Cornucopia, but I guess I just did. I mean, I guess if you don't feel like crafting a Mythic from Big Score or like whatever set Cornucopia was from, I kind of forget now, then like this is actually kind of a decent replacement now that I think about it. I really actually wanted to stay away from comparing them, but now I'm actually doing it because the more I think about it, I can't attack for 4 with an Ancient Cornucopia. An Ancient Cornucopia can't get in front of my opponent's 4-power creature, 4-toughness creature, and like trade in combat. Like these are actually pretty good modes when you really get down to it. See, I told you the commons were like kind of all right today. Let's move on to the last couple here. We got to look at Bestow Greatness and Interface Ace down here. I like Interface Ace, but I'm going to save him for a second and look at Bestow Greatness first because puppy dog. It's a good puppy boy. It's a Corgi. He's a good looking boy. He's 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Target creature gets +4/+4, gains trample until end of turn. Doesn't look like much, especially for 3 mana, but +4/+4 and trample is a little bit serious. We're kind of in serious territory here. Is it worth paying 3 mana for this card? I would say like some of the time. There's a Gruul aggro deck in Standard right now that probably doesn't want to spend like all 3 of its mana most turns on this one card, but still a massive blowout, right? You put it on your Monastery Swiftspear and it suddenly swings, 6 power? Well, what about Slick Shot? So that's 6. I believe that's 7, actually. Yes, 7 on a Slick Shot. That's something. Put it on a Heartfire Hero. What are we looking at? Because you targeted, that's 2. That's 6 for a Heartfire Hero. Emberheart Challenger, I think, is 7 as well, because prowess 4, 5, 6. Yeah, Emberheart Challenger is 7 power as well. Just like everything gets huge and gets trample. It seems pretty okay, man. Like, I kind of don't hate this. Again, I think 3 mana is kind of a sticking point for a card like this, and most decks like that don't want something to cost 3 mana. It's a bit hefty, but at the same time, man, this probably just like ends the game. Just punch through with whatever and deal a buttload of damage, which is the scientific term. So I don't know, like maybe certain Gruul aggro decks are kind of into it. But now we get down to the last common of the day. I was a little bit shocked that this was common, mostly because it seems okay and limited. This is a 2 mana, 1 and a white, 0/4 artifact creature, robot pilot. This creature saddles mounts and cruise vehicles using its toughness rather than its power. Whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it. This ability triggers only once each turn, sadly, I guess. I mean, I feel like if it triggered more than that, it'd be like Wombo combos and Commander and stuff. You just go infinite. I will say, though, if you can give this thing an activated ability with like an Agatha's Soul Cauldron or something like that, then being able to untap it at least once during your turn might be a cool application. But just for crewing vehicles twice, great. It's crews most of the vehicles in the set. I think we've only seen like 1 crew 5 or whatever, but most of the vehicles crew 3, and like I think 1 or 2 that we've seen does crew 4. So at common, this guy blocks everything. That's pretty cool. He can crew a vehicle and then crew another vehicle or saddle a mount or whatever, like twice in the same turn. Or he can just like crew or saddle one thing and then sit up for defense with his big old booty. So like this dude seems pretty good and limited if nothing else to find something that can pilot all the stuff that you have to pilot. So I like it there, but I'm not too sure that it really makes the cut in like the standard mounts deck or the standard vehicles deck. Is that even a thing? The standard mounts deck for sure is. But I'm not sure that it goes there, but again, in limited, I think this is going to be kind of an all-star at common, too. Like, super easy to pick up. Let's move on to the uncommons real quick and look at a couple of cards that probably could have been common, but like just like the commons today, the uncommons do have a couple of powerful things that I want to look at. We'll get to them in a second, but first we got to look at Pace Setter Paragon over here, as well as Back on Track. Now, Paragon is 3 mana, it's 2 and a red for a 2/3 human pilot with exhaust for 2 and a red. So just pay its casting cost again. And you put a +1/+1 counter on her, and she gains double strike until end of turn. It'd be nice if she got like a double strike counter. That would be gross. But as it is, a 3 mana 2/3 that I have to pay to make, a 3/4, and it only gets a double strike for 1 turn. Like, it can do it at instant speed. I'll say that much about this exhaust ability and all exhaust abilities, is that so far that a lot of them are instant speed, unless they say specifically otherwise. You can do this when this guy goes unblocked or when it blocks something up. So I don't know, that might be a nice little mode, but as it stands, I think that a 3 mana 2/3 is not very good in this environment from what we can tell. Even with the exhaust ability, I'm just not buying it. Back on Track is up next. 5 mana, 4 and a black for a sorcery. Return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this creature, or this token, saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles as though its power 2 or greater. You know what pilots do in this set. At this point in spoiler season, I really ought to just be able to say that it makes one of those pilot tokens. Like, you know what I'm talking about. But okay, so 5 mana reanimator spell. In this case, the gravy, the upside, is that you get a little guy. You get an extra guy. And that's kind of nice, like he can block. That's good, whatever. I kind of take that some of the time. You get extra value even if they blow your reanimated guy off the table. But in that case, it was just like 5 mana for a 1/1 and your opponent discards a removal spell. That's not a very good rate, I would say, at sorcery speed. But still, value is value. And I kind of like that. I liked it if you pull a vehicle out of your yard, and as long as the vehicle has crew 3, then you can crew it immediately. That's kind of nice if you can give the vehicle haste somehow. So there are cool things about the card. We just saw something flagship the other day. It's like a 7 mana vehicle, a 7/7 flying lifelink first strike. I think it looks nasty. And being able to reanimate that seems like kind of cool, but we'll see other uncommons today that can reanimate it better, very likely. So we'll get to those in just a second. As it is, I don't mind this as a 5 mana reanimator spell, but we obviously have better options in standard. Just play Zombify. And next I'm going to look at a couple of really neat cards that I'm just not sure are quite there, but boy, do I like them. So let's check out Haunt the Network and Carrion Cruiser here. Haunt the Network is 5 mana, 3, a black, and a blue for a sorcery. Choose target opponent. Create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. And then the chosen player loses X life, and you gain X life, X being the number of artifacts you control. I feel like there was a 6 mana Teferi like 2 years ago in Standard that had a minus ability that was kind of like this, and I always wanted him to be good, and he was just like never good. Not a very good sign for this. But, nowadays, we didn't necessarily have all this back then, right? Nowadays, we have clue tokens and map tokens and treasure tokens and just like artifact tokens out the woo-zooby. So, maybe this gets a little bit better. We have like Spyglass Siren and Novice Inspector and stuff like that just like incidentally makes little junk tokens and stuff. But again, this is 5 mana. Maybe it's the final shot, the flying elbow drop or something like that. Just a finishing maneuver for a sort of blue-black or even Esper artifacts list. But I'm just not seeing it. You're betting your whole nut on this 5 mana sorcery that's just going to get countered or what? I don't know, man. I'm trying not to be like too pessimistic about it, but I think that the setup is a bit much a lot of the time for a card like this. I will say it's going to always at least, zap him for 2, you gain 2 life because a couple of Thopters, that's nice. It does give you some board presence. The creatures fly, there are good things about this card. And if you just have a couple of incidental tokens out, I could see it doing like 4 to 5 damage to your opponent. So don't get me wrong. I know it sounds like I'm just like pooping all over the card, but I actually think that the card is really, really cool, and I want to try to play it. But I also have to try to be as like realistic as possible. And for 5 mana, I think this is probably just like right out. But we're gonna try it on stream, man. Especially as Brule Roundable as it is, and it's just an uncommon. This thing's calling my name, but we'll see about my expectations once we actually get into the arena with it. Now, Carrion Cruiser over here is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3/2 vehicle that crews for just 1. And when it enters, you mill 2 cards, and then you return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand. I actually kind of have a good feeling about this little guy right here. I don't think he's playable in the face of, look at all the black 3-drops in Standard. Liliana of the Veil, Glissa to an extent, Preacher of the Schism, obviously, Unstoppable Slasher, Unholy Annex. I mean, this guy just does not fit with all the other 3-drops that we have access to. It's nowhere near as powerful, but it's actually... Okay, so that's the realistic portion, the spiky portion of the analysis. As far as Dev actually being Dev, right? I do have to point out that the card is like, it replaces itself when it comes into play. So long as you either already had a dude in your yard or you hit a dude with the mill ability, it's generous enough to give you that. And I should point out that it has a mill ability. There's plenty of decks that are looking for that, like Urborg Lurgoyf type decks and anything that wants to mill itself. This is actually a pretty good little thing because it doesn't have the best stat line in the world for what you're paying for it, but it does have an extremely low crew cost that I respect. So even in, these graveyard heavy decks, things like, Rubble Belt Maverick and Snarling Gorehound and stuff can crew this. A fresh roots token can crew this. These are all kind of nice. And note that it triggers roots, right? It takes creature out of your yard, you get a little roots token, all that's cool. But again, I think that it more or less falls short of real playability, but it does kind of catch my eye. Right? You can blink this in a number of ways. There might be a way to reanimate it, but you could bounce it if you wanted to and put it back into play. And every time, it's not only giving you the value of getting a creature back to your hand, that's like actual card selection, but you're also getting the mills, which can provide you value in a number of ways too. So, I don't know. Again, I like the little guy, but you have to acknowledge all the other 3-drops we have access to in Standard. All that said, though, solid Magic card in a vacuum. I want to play it, but I don't know if it's going to be worth it. We'll see, I guess. There's only one way to find out. Next, we'll look at Nesting Robot as well as Roadside Blowout here. These are kind of interesting cards. Nesting Robot is just a single white mana for a 1/1 artifact creature. It's a robot. It has start your engines, and once you hit max speed, it gets +1/+0. All right. When this creature dies, create a colorless 1/1 servo artifact creature token. There's been a few of these max speed cards that I've seen so far that don't really care if they hit max speed or not. And those are my favorite ones, right? A little bit later in the game, starting as early as turn 3, if you do it right, this can be a Savannah Lions. And okay, it's fine. It's better than not being a Savannah Lions, I guess. But any copy that you might draw late becomes slightly better. That's good, sure, but what you really want out of this is the fact that it puts an artifact into play, and then it puts an artifact into play, right? If you Gleeful Demolition this away, I actually think there's a pretty good argument for playing this in the red-white, Imodane's Recruiter deck, right? You Gleeful Demolition this away, and it puts 4 tokens into play, dog. That seems like exactly the kind of card that deck wants, so could easily see it seeing play in that deck. It's an artifact, right? And once you get the artifact token, the servo that it leaves behind, you just Gleeful Demolition again, kid. All of this seems really, really good to me, so I'm into this guy. A Roadside Blowout over here is probably a little better than it looks, I think. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. This spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets a permanent with mana value 1. Return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand, and then draw yourself a card. All right, so I will say that for the purposes of certain decks, the an opponent controls kind of ruins this card. There's a lot of 1-drops in the format right now that you can bounce because almost everyone's trying to get on board on turn 1 in some way or another. And this will provide you with a little bit of tempo and also draw you a card. But it doesn't really stop there, You can also just bounce any creature for 3 mana and draw a card, which I know, again, at sorcery speed seems a little bit terrible compared to Unsummon and Flood Maw, but drawing a card is great. It's really, 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 really good, drawing cards. So, I don't know, with the ability to occasionally cast this for a single mana against a ton of matchups in Standard right now, I could actually see it doing a thing from time to time, especially out of sideboards. But quality-wise, we're really going to look up for our next couple of uncommons here. Let's look at Tune Up and Stock Up. You see what I did? It's 4 mana, 3 and a white for Tune Up over on the left side of your screen. This is a sorcery. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's a vehicle, it becomes an artifact creature. It just becomes one forever. Nice. So again, flagship from this set, the 7/7 flying first strike lifelink. Just dump that and then reanimate it on turn 4 if you feel like it. So in this case, you actually have a Zombify 4 Portal to Phyrexia. It's kind of a big deal, So could imagine that if nothing else coming from this card. But we'll look next at Stock Up over here. Kind of a upgraded divination in some ways. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I think some people would be tempted to say the sorcery speed kills this, but I kind of don't really think so. I don't, man. I don't know that this is going to see like all of the standard play. We do have similar-ish effects to this available to us, but not many of them actually put 2 cards into our hand, right? This kind of card advantage rather than card selection on a 3-drop like this is not exactly, extremely common. I'd say one of the better analogs we have to this in Standard right now is actually Quick Study. Draws us 2 cards, costs 3 mana. That one's instant speed. And it does see some play from time to time. And honestly, I think Quick Study is likely to be the better card a good bit of the time. That said, this kind of selection is really hard to come by. It's not quite dig through time, but it's 5. Look at the top 5. Top 5 cards. You're going to get something really, really good off of this card, and especially in combo builds that are looking for specific cards. Apart from that, the decks that are looking for their turn 4 sweeper or something and they need to absolutely guarantee it, this does that while also guaranteeing you the land drop effectively that you need to hit that sweeper. So, I don't know. I think there's just a lot to be said for this. But I actually think my favorite uncommon of the day, and I'm a little bit biased here, is Glory Heath Lynx. This came out a little bit after I stopped the stream last night, and I wanted to jump right back on and talk about it. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/3 cat mount with lifelink. It saddles for 2. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Can you show me the bad part of this card? Cats. Kind of wanted another strong 2-drop. It's got a few, right? It was Sky Knight Squire and Helpful Hunter. They're decent 2-drop cats, but this one actually has a great starting stat line, which very few 2-drop cats already have. So that's good. Lifelink is somewhat important in that deck for a couple of reasons. Apart from that, though, Savannah Lions, a 1-drop can crew this. I think that's worth pointing out. Aurobo can crew this, and you almost never want to send Aurobo into combat. But once Aurobo's out, then obviously, 1 power stuff like Helpful Hunter can now crew this as well. So again, these are all, I think, relatively important lines. I like a good bit. But apart from that, life gain decks might want it because it can be crewed by relatively small creatures in those decks and creatures that you might want to send in, right? You don't usually want to send in Ellasil Core. You often don't even want to send in Starscape Cleric, even though it can't block. You just don't want to, send it into a group of flyers. Like a Spyglass Siren can stop, that card. A Fairy Mastermind can stop a Starscape Cleric from really attacking, but this can attack into those cards. I think it's kind of important too. So there's some cool things about this. Ultimately, I don't think Life Gain ends up playing a card like this, but Cats, on the other hand, which needs a couple of strong cards, gets one in the form of this little guy right here, I think is a little bit more than meets the eye. But now we are in the rares. We got to see 5 rares today. Doesn't seem like that much, but I'm pretty sure all of these are in some way, shape, or form important. You could make an argument that all of these rares we got to see today are pretty decent. So it's kind of hard to know where to start. I'm going to start, though, with the best boy. It's District Mascot over here. This is a single green mana for a 0/0 dog mount. I'm sorry for leaning back from the mic. A single green mana for a 0/0 dog mount. It enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. And you can pay 1 and a green and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it to destroy target artifact. Okay. Also, whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and it saddles for a single power. So, okay, for 1 green mana, we're doing okay here. It might not grow super fast, but turn over turn, by turn 3, this should be basically a 1 mana 3/3. That's a rogue elephant. You're doing okay. Now, obviously, you're not attacking with other creatures in order to attack with this. So that could suck. But, if you play this on turn 1, a 2-drop on 2, it's very likely your 2-drop doesn't have haste, so you just tap it down, attack with this guy, and apparently now you have, an Isamaru, a 1 mana 2/2 on turn 2 that's attacking. So, again, the stat line is a little bit better than it kind of looks, especially if you can find a way to increase the number of +1/+1 counters on it. Any deck that relies on +1/+1 counters and doubling them and caring about when creatures get them and blah, blah, is going to like this as a 1-drop. So just that function's pretty good. Apart from that, though, blowing up artifacts is especially nice. It's one of the reasons this really needed to be rare in the limited environment, because it would just go willy-nilly blowing up vehicles left and right. It's really, really good in a vehicle, populated format to have a thing like this. But there's obviously stuff too, like Urabrass Forge and Standard at Large, that you might want to blow up with a guy like this. So really, really cool. He doesn't have to die to blow him an artifact up, but he can if you really need to blow that thing up right now. So just a whole lot of playability on this dude, I think, but I'm just not exactly sure where he's going to end up. Day one, he really needs a deck, but that deck could just be the mounts deck. This is one of the very, very few 1-drop mounts, if the only one maybe, that we actually have access to. Don't check my math on that, but again, we have very few 1-drop mounts for sure, and that deck's going to want those. So at least there, but altogether, nice little package here, and it helps that he is just so adorable. But we'll look next at Explosive Getaway. This is 5 mana, 3 a white and a red for a sorcery. Exile up to 1 target artifact or creature. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Explosive Gateway deals 4 damage to each creature. Okay, so a sweeper that saves one of your dudes, theoretically at least. I gotta say, though, I don't love the 4 damage in this environment right now, like the 6/6 token from the, whatever, Unholy Annex, Archfiend of the Dross, Sheldred, they all go, above this card. And this is a little bit slower mana-wise than all of those cards, or at least on par with, the Demon from Unholy Annex. So this is going to not look so great in every single game, I'll say that much. But for the most part, this is going to sweep just about every important creature in Standard off the board, which is nice, and save one of your dudes too. And I like that you could probably play some creatures in your deck that don't die to this, so you don't really feel the need to, exile them, but you'll exile something else, Like if I play Sanguine Evangelist on 3, this is just one example off the top of my head. You go Sanguine Evangelist on 3, Biza on turn 4. And then on turn 5, you play this thing. Well, your Biza's not dying to it, so you just blink your Sanguine Evangelist. Who cares if you lose your bat? Maybe you blocked with it one of those turns. And then when the Sanguine Evangelist comes back, you'll get another bat, you know what I mean? So at that point, after the sweep, you'll have a board with 3 creatures on it. One was a 4/5, the other one has Battle Cry. So that seems like pretty good positioning to me, so long as you actually swept the board on the other side of the table. And again, apart from some of the examples I've already given you, you will be sweeping most board states with this. So I think it's actually a pretty workable sweeper in this color combination. The only other problem is that it contends at this mana cost with stuff like Sunfall, and it does so, I think, somewhat poorly at this stage in the game, so it may have to wait for some rotations, but altogether I do think it's a pretty solid Magic card. But watch out, everybody, we have the potentially best O-ring effect of all time. It could be. We got Perilous Snare over here. 2 and a white for an artifact with Start Your Engines. At max speed, you can tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on a creature or a vehicle you control at sorcery speed. And also, the important part, when this artifact enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. So pretty hilarious, I would say. I believe this is also, if the translation is correct, worded the way you want it to be, to where if you can somehow get the Perilous Snare off the table while the ETB trigger is on the stack, you've effectively removed the thing you're targeting forever. So that could be cute, but just remember that fun little rules interaction. But yeah, this is just a theoretically, I think, arguably harder to remove Oblivion Ring, at least in Standard, where there's not a ton of things that remove artifacts that people actually play. And when's the last time you saw in a Braid? I don't know, maybe on the arena like today, but I just don't see that much artifact destruction anymore outside of a couple of cards. So Tear Asunder, I guess, whatever. But still, again, I think that you get my point. This is slightly less removable overall in the meta than an enchantment would be, so it's got that going for it. But it has to be better than like Assimilation Aegis. We got that card a few sets ago and it hasn't really done squat. But this does go along with Assimilation Aegis if you need extra copies of a card like this in the Simulacrum Synthesizer deck, so that's one place to put it. But that said, this does say target non-land permanent. There's absolutely no real restriction on this, unlike some other O-ring effects that we've seen before. 4, right? So I like that about it. It can hit literally anything. And once you've gotten max speed, a +1/+1 counter, an extra +1/+1 counter every single turn is actually kind of dope. Again, I think that might be the scientific term this time around. That could actually be extremely threatening once you do have max speed. But again, just like I said earlier, I like that this is one of those max speed cards that doesn't actually care if you have max speed. Like, again, once you do, you're really pressing the advantage at that point. An extra +1/+1 counter is pretty good. I mean, imagine, like an Innkeeper's Talent or a Fight Rigging or a Luminarch Aspirant, right? It's a card like that, only it's also a removal spell, and that kind of makes my eyes light up a little bit, so I think this thing is pretty decent. But up next, speaking of my eyes lighting up, I'm particularly excited for this next card. It's Demonic Junker, our final rare of the day before we hit our 1 Mythic. This is 7 mana, 6 and a black for a 4/3 vehicle with Affinity for artifacts, and it crews for just 2, but this is the cool part. When it enters, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you control was destroyed this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this vehicle. So you could have a 6/5 here if you want to basically sacrifice one of your own guys. And I think you will some of the time, especially depending on what creature it is. You got a greedy freebooter, an infestation sage, like something you really don't mind dying, right? They're like, cool, got a Midnight Reaper out, right? Then suddenly you can draw a card or whatever. I don't know, altogether, I like this. Just put it that way, dude. I've been waiting for a girl like this for a while, man. Like a Necrotal, a Ravenous Chupacabra, a Shriek Maw. We've seen tons of creatures like this in the past, but I feel like we haven't had a good one in a while, unless you count Skyfish or Spider, and I kind of do. Anybody that follows me on Twitter or watches the streams knows that I'm low-key obsessed with Skyfish or Spider. But now we have a card that's in a lot of ways better than that card. You really have to be in a somewhat artifact heavy deck, and that kind of sucks. But like I said earlier, man, we are in a pretty artifact heavy format right now. You're passing out artifacts like candy, man, between map tokens and treasure tokens and clue tokens, and who knows, man. You could really get this thing out super duper fast, at which point it's got a pretty decent power toughness, even if you didn't put the 2 +1/+1 counters on it. I'll kind of take it, right? So just the fact that this can blow up anything, and in Commander, it blows up 3 different things. It's absolutely nuts, dude. I think this card actually has a future out of it. Today is full of cards that I think are probably better than they really look at first glance. I think some people are going to look at this and just say, MEH, meh. But I don't know. I got high hopes, and maybe they're too high. Maybe I am. I don't know what the deal is, but one way or the other, I just don't think it's going to be tough to get a slew of artifacts out, cast this for 2 mana. It could be easier to make work than it sounds. But here's the final card of the day, at least so far, right? And it's after midnight as I'm recording this. It was a long day, so let's take a look at Mu Yannling, Wind Rider. Mu Yannling's back, everybody. Lost her spark, but still love her. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for a 2/4 legendary human wizard pilot. When it enters, create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. Vehicles you control have flying. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Okay, so the positives first this time, because I have one thing to say about this that might just blow all the other arguments about it out of the water, and I'm not sure I like it, but in any case, there's a lot of good stuff about this, right? 4 mana for 5 total power on a blue card. You don't see that every day. Across 2 bodies. One of those bodies effectively flies because of this passive ability. But apart from that, she can crew the thing that she makes, which I do like. All your vehicles gain flying, not just the thing that she makes. And, of course, if the thing that she makes gets through, then you draw a card, which I kind of like too. But it's just true of all your creatures, not vehicles or anything like that. Just any creatures with flying get through, you get to draw cards. And honestly, that's a pretty good little package, considering that the creature that she makes can't be go for the throated. I like that. She herself cannot be cut down. She can't be anoint with affliction. I guess that's kind of nice. She can't be nowhere to run. She dodges a few removal spells in standard right now. And even if she does get hit by removal, she still leaves behind pretty decent value, a 3-power guy that crews really easily off Fountain Port, or Mirex. You can crew the 3/2. So I don't know, altogether the value is kind of there, and I like drawing cards, but and you can draw cards the turn this comes into play effectively. If you get through with a couple of flyers on turn 4 when you play her, draw a couple of cards. Like, oh, that's sweet. The problem is Enduring Curiosity just exists already in the standard and is just better. You know, just a better card than this. It technically dies to more removal because it soaks up, you know, Nowhere to Runs and Lightning Strikes and Torch the Tower and dies to that. And Torch kills it forever and you don't even get it to come. It doesn't come back. All that said, though, often when it does eat a removal spell, it will just come back to the battlefield. It can't attack or block, whatever, but you're still getting the ability you wanted out of it. It works when any creature hits for combat damage and not just flyers. So there's, although most of the creatures in your deck are flyers, in the Enduring Curiosity deck, right? Like Fairy Mastermind, Spyglass Siren, all that stuff, they're all flyers. But either way, it triggers off of anything hitting, so that makes it better as well. And it has Flash, and Flash is insane compared to not Flash, right? Compared to slow. So altogether, just Enduring Curiosity just absolutely murders, I think, any playability this card would have. But, you know, maybe as copies 5 and 6, or just copy 5 of Enduring Curiosity-like effects in your deck. And again, the fact that it sort of leaves behind more technical, like threatening value than Enduring Curiosity. I kind of like that about it too. But really, again, once you start comparing the two cards, there kind of is no real comparison. Last lame thing I think that I should point out is that she herself does not have flying. You know, I mean, obviously the flavor is that like she flies on the bike, she crews the bike or whatever, you know, but I don't care what the flavor is. I just want her to fly as well, so that even if the bike dies, you can still get through with her, draw a card. That would be nice, but alas, I guess. Either way, still a solid Magic card, all things considered. And even though I think that Curiosity is just a better card, there's a couple of situations where it's basically a wash when you compare the two of them. So again, copy 5, you know, could be a thing, but I'm not sure how many more 4-drops those decks really want to push. Either way, good, decent Magic card, cool for like vehicles decks, interesting commander, I guess, if you want to use it that way. And again, can have some real value the turn it hits the table. So there's a lot that I do like about this Mythic, but it's far from the best card of the day, at least in my opinion. Now, as far as the best cards today, I'm pretty sure those were the Murdermobile over here, the Bestest Boy, and probably the robot that makes a robot when it robots. So, because yo dog, heard you like robots. There were some really, really good cards today. I know that people aren't liking Aetherdrift as much as perhaps they've liked other sets. You know, view counts on the videos, if nothing else, have shown that, but also the comments on the videos have shown that. A lot of people just aren't really super into this set, but every day we keep getting really, really powerful cards that, despite the theme of the set and how you feel about it, actually seem pretty fun to play. So maybe eventually we'll turn some hearts around on Aetherdrift, you know. We'll see, but one way or the other, I'm going to enjoy playing some of these cards because some of these cards look ridiculous. But that's all we've got for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be joining you for a short preview video sometime this weekend, but I may also be uploading In Defense of Aetherdrift, a video I've been talking about for a good month here, but I think I'm almost ready for it. Either way, make sure you're subbed to the channel so you get all that content and all of next week's previews, plus the top 50, top 10 sleepers, the content I'm doing with Power Dragon, where we talk about overrated and underrated cards. So much stuff coming up in the next like 2 weeks here. So make sure you're subscribed to get all the content. Hit the bell for the notifications as well if you're into it. Hit the thumbs up. That'll put me in more people's recommended. It's literally shaped like a thumb. You can't miss it. And that would be good for me, if nothing else. But apart from that, you can check out the Patreon if you want to vote on what decks we do in Aetherdrift Standard first, or second, or third, or fourth. You can always throw $1 a month my way. That's all I'm really asking from you, to vote on stuff. Link in the description if you're into it. But apart from that, more or less done's over this onezo, so I'll let you get back to whatever you were doing. I'm sorry that you have to do that, but our time's over now. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.